Welcome to From Students to Licensed Professionals, Protecting Your Rights.
Welcome to From Students to Licensed Professionals, Protecting Your Rights with attorney James Kosnett. James has represented students, parents, and families for decades, helping them navigate academic misconduct allegations, expulsions, special education disputes, and other high-stakes school issues. I'm Lisa Mosbey, and today we're talking about what parents can do when a school denies needed special education support. Welcome, James. It's great to have you with me today.
Hi, Lisa. Great to see you again.
Thank you. James, what is happening when a parent believes their child needs support, but the school is saying that the child doesn't qualify?
Well, that happens sometimes. Usually, a parent notices that there's a problem and requests an IEP. There's also something called a 504, which is the federal version that you can request. But I always recommend that the parents go with the state, which is the IEP, or the Individualized Education Program, IEP. Why? Because I feel that the IEP is stronger, gives you more rights, and I don't see any advantage to the 504. So I always recommend the IEP, almost always. And when a parent requests that, they have to react within a certain number of days, usually 20 days. They have to assess the child, and they have to hold an IEP team meeting, typically at the school. So who's at this meeting? Well, you've got the parent. The child should not come to the meeting, in my opinion. You should have the parent. The parent can bring a support person, a doctor, an attorney, anyone they want to assist them and to help explain what the problem is with the child. You typically have the principal of the school there. You often have someone from the district there who specializes in special education. You might have an attorney from the district, especially if there's an attorney representing the parents, which is fine. You you often have the homeroom teacher or one basic general teacher, and then sometimes you have some additional teachers. If there's a special ed teacher, you have the special ed teacher. If there's an English teacher and the problem seems to be in English, you'd have the English teacher. Math, you'd have the math teacher. Both, you'd have both. And that's how the program, the IEP team usually starts. Okay. And then they discuss what the assessments show, and the different people who made the assessment would give a report. The school psychologist would report as to the psychological assessment. If they had an eye test, then the person who administered that eye test or analyzed it would report. A hearing test, the same kind of thing. The different specialties would report, and they would determine whether this child has a disability that the school has to work with and deal with, whatever that is, a attention deficit disorder or whatever. If the school's people feel that the child does not, and the parent disagrees, the parent can speak up right then and there. And if the parent has their own family doctor, for example, or a therapist, or an educational consultant, or an attorney who has evidence to the contrary, or a different view of the same evidence that was presented to the team, they can argue. And if they reach an agreement, they can proceed to decide what services should be offered.
So, James, when a school denies services or support, I understand that they can argue, but what else can parents do at that point to make sure their child is provided for?
Okay, so let's say they argue and they don't convince them, and the parents say no. The school says no to the parent. There's nothing that needs to be done, nothing that can be done. Okay. Then you can request due process. You request due process, and what you are saying is you want to put this in front of a special education judge, an administrative law judge, who's expert in this area. And that person is going to hear the evidence from both sides and make a determination.
And James, what is it that parents get wrong about how these decisions are made?
Well, they don't understand the process. So that one thing we can do right now is kind of give an overview of that process. So if right away from the get-go you can't convince the school that your child has a learning disability or some impairment or some special need that requires a little extra care, some special services, it doesn't have to be something major. It can be tutoring one day a week. It could be just an arrangement where the teacher would send home the assignments on a written report that the child takes to the parent, and the parent signs it and the child brings it back so the teacher knows that the parent is actually seeing what those homework assignments are that day or that week. It could be something simple, but whatever the case may be, if they won't even agree to do that, then you ask for due process. Let's say they do agree that something is needed, but you don't think the services, when I say you, the parent doesn't feel that the services that are being suggested are enough. For example, maybe they feel tutoring one day a week for 1 hour should be sufficient, but the parent doesn't agree and can't convince them. Parent wants 3 times a week, for example. Well, as a practical matter, Lisa, quite often there's some kind of compromise. And I often urge my client to accept the compromise because it's not like it's set in stone. There's nothing that says, oh, I gave up my rights. I compromised and now I can't do anything about it. No, if you compromise and you try it for a few weeks or a month and it's not working, you could go back and say, hey, we tried that. It's not enough. We do need more. So the parent has nothing to lose, not much anyway, by giving in a little bit to try to get things, get the ball rolling, get something going. It's good to compromise if you can. But let's say that the sides are far apart. Again, the parent can request due process. And what happens there, we'll get to in a second. Let's say the school agrees with the parent. Everyone's in agreement. Let's say there's going to be, I'll just make up something, tutoring 3 times a week, and there's an agreement for that, and it's reduced to writing. But nobody shows up 3 times a week or 2 times a week. They're not fulfilling their agreement. Again, you ask for due process. So you ask for due process in order to either get a finding that the child needs help or to get additional help, more help than the school has agreed to give, or to enforce an agreement as to the sides are in agreement, but they're just not following through and giving what they promised.
And James, what does it look like for the parent to formally challenge the school's decision? When you say due process, what's a formal challenge look like?
There's a pretty much of a form that has to be filed. And it's something that a parent can do without an attorney, but it can be tricky. It can get technical. So it's often best if you can afford an attorney to get an attorney to assist you or represent you in filing a claim with the Office of Administrative Hearings. And that's what we mean by due process. That sets the legal rights in motion at that point. Now, you can ask for a hearing immediately, or you can agree to go to mediation first. Mediation is when there'll be a trained neutral that will meet with both sides and see what can be done to avoid a hearing, get both sides to agree to compromise. I like this option. I often think it ought to be utilized because it will often include a payment of attorney's fees to the parent to reimburse the parent for what was spent on an attorney to get to that point. And it's a way to save time, really, and to save energy and to move the sides together forward. So I like to avail myself of the option of mediation whenever possible. But either way, let's say mediation doesn't work. If mediation works, then you don't go to hearing. The hearing's taken off calendar. Let's say mediation doesn't work. Or let's say the parent says, I've been to mediation before. I don't want to waste any time in mediation this time. I just want to go straight to a hearing. Fine. Either way, the next step would be an actual hearing in front of a judge. And often this is done remotely, and the parties appear, and the parent presents their case, and they show whatever it is they're trying to show, that, hey, my child needs special education help, they're not getting it, or my child needs help, they're not giving me enough. Here's what they're offered me, but here's what we think he or she needs. Or, hey, they've agreed to give it to us. We're all in agreement. Here's a signed agreement, but we're not getting it. We're not getting the help that they've agreed to give us. And how do you present that? You present that through the parent's testimony, and then any additional evidence, like a report from a doctor, or the doctor himself or herself can appear and talk, or the therapist. The parent can give firsthand knowledge of what they're observing, what they're seeing, and the specialist, the health provider, can give more detail and analysis. Then, of course, the school will give their version of it. Each side is subject to cross-examination by the other, just like in a court of law. It's a little more relaxed, it's a little more informal, but it still proceeds according to the rules. The judge will control the presentation, might move it along, might order the person to give a further answer, or they might disallow a question if they feel it's irrelevant. And then at the end, the judge will issue a decision. And usually the people will follow it. Sometimes one side or the other wants to appeal, but neither side typically wants to spend too much money with the lawyers and courts and so on. Quite often they'll accept whatever that judge rules, and we'll take it from there.
And James, I'm curious, based on your experience and what you've seen, what factors tend to influence whether a child ultimately receives the support they need when they're going through this process?
Well, that depends on a number of factors. I generally like the IEP concept and the approach. I find that most of them do want what's best for the child. And I think that if you have a good principal and a good district, they're going to, if not give you everything you want, they're going to offer some additional help. They'll recognize that there is a problem. Typically there's a problem, and what can we do about it? And they will try to do something to improve the situation. It might not be in everything the parent's asking for. So how can you as a parent maximize your chance? Well, you should be prepared. You should be able to listen, but then respond, give concrete examples of why you feel that maybe extra help is needed here or there. And if you have the support of a doctor or a therapist, that's very powerful, because here you have a professional who's corroborating and underlining what you're saying and giving further support. And then if you have an attorney to organize everything and present it, I think that maximizes your chance of success.
Makes sense. You know, when these cases move toward a resolution versus when they continue to stall, what typically drives that outcome?
Well, I think that the mediators are pretty good. I think that uh, I think that if both sides sit down in good faith to mediate, I've seen cases where people are at great odds, and you'd be surprised how they can be brought together. When and the mediators are very skillful, and I think if they approach it and both sides approach it in good faith, I think you're going to uh, uh, reach a resolution. You know, the school doesn't want to just have to pay a lot of money. Yes, it costs them money to provide services, but also if they lose, they'll have to provide the services and pay for the other side's attorney too. So they don't want that. So I think that if you go there and you are sincere and clear about what you want and you have the support of it, and then if you're willing to just take a little bit less just to get some progress, I think that maximizes your chance of a success and a successful outcome.
James, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your experience, walking us through what we can expect in these situations.
My pleasure.
That's it for today's episode of From Students to Licensed Professionals, Protecting Your Rights with James Kosnett. If your child is being denied special education services or you're struggling to get the support they need, visit educationlawyer.org to learn more and schedule a free consultation. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to like, subscribe to the show, and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.